Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the GSMC Football Podcast. I am your host, Matthew Quinn. As always, we're brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about some remaining NFL free agents now that the NFL draft is in our rear view mirror. We're also going to talk a little bit about some divisions in the AFC, both the AFC West and the AFC East, kind of an outlook now that the draft is over. And make sure you tune in for later on in the show, and we're going to be talking about some Colorado Buffaloes football, their season outlook here in our College Corner. That's going to be the last segment of the show, so definitely stick around for that. But before we start, just want to ask that you guys like and follow the show. If you have a question or a comment or anything like that that you want to add to the show, we definitely want to hear it. Your input is always a big part of what we do here, and we thrive on all of your energy and your insight. So whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion that you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the super chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a great way to support the channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate all of the support. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit that super chat button, and let's keep this show interactive and exciting. And if you prefer, you can always go to the GSMCsports.net website to tip, donate, and leave a question or a comment there. Couldn't do what we do without you guys, and we're so thankful to have you as part of our community. So thanks again for the support. And again, that link is GSMCsports.net if you want to leave a question or a comment over there. So let's go ahead and get into the first segment here. Just the best remaining free agents. Now that the NFL draft is over, teams are starting to get ready for rookie minicamp and continued OTAs and things like that. So there's a few guys out there that I think could still be useful on somebody's training camp squad or trying to make the roster or whatever the case may be. And we're going to just go over some of those guys. Probably the best rated free agent that is out there currently in terms of skill position players would be Amari Cooper, wideout, who was last year on both Cleveland and Buffalo. Spent a number of years in Cleveland, was a productive wide receiver there. Of course, Dallas before that, and then the Raiders way back when he first was drafted. He's been a productive receiver throughout his whole career. Last year was probably, in terms of stats, probably his worst year of his career, but he did bounce around to a couple teams and did have a couple of injuries here and there, so it wasn't a super productive year for Amari Cooper. But that's not to say that he cannot be productive anymore. I think he absolutely can. He could be useful in anybody's lineup. I wouldn't even rule out a reunion with the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys are in need for some opposite players, players opposite CeeDee Lamb on that offense. They didn't really strike anything in the NFL draft, so they can still go after a couple wide receivers. There's a couple other ones that are out there other than Amari Cooper, one in which we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this segment. But Amari Cooper last year, 547 yards, 4 touchdowns, and had 44 total catches over 14 total games with the Browns and Bills. Of course, he missed a few games here and there due to injury. So he was still, it's still not great numbers, but still productive enough considering that he had injuries that he was dealing with throughout the course of the year. So I think if he comes back healthy, I know he's an aging wide receiver, but I think somebody could find a use for him for sure. Another guy on this list here I have is Asante Samuel Jr. He's a guy that still has not been picked up yet. Of course, playing with the Chargers at the beginning of his career. He's been knocked for some poor tackling in the past, and he has struggled in press coverage as well. So those are a couple knocks on him, but he still is a playmaker, and I think he did steadily improve in his tenure with the Chargers there. I think he would be a good asset in the right system, a good defensive coach, a good secondary to kind of play a good role-playing sort of role, or maybe he can find a way into the starting lineup on a very cornerback-needy team. So just something to look out for there. Another guy on the list that I'm actually kind of surprised that nobody has taken a flyer on yet, and that's J.K. Dobbins, running back, former Charger, but most notably former Raven. Hasn't really gotten onto the field as a Charger. He had a few injuries last year that he was dealing with. And he was a comeback player of the year finalist. So he's definitely productive in that regard. If he can come back 100% healthy, and this would be 2 full seasons removed from his Achilles tear that he had a couple years ago. If he can come back fully 100% healthy, I think he can absolutely bring some sort of explosive element to a team's run game. Maybe an injury happens midpoint of the year or something. He'd be a good guy to add. Or if you're pretty short on running backs, as a team, or you need some depth, I think he could provide some pretty good depth. Obviously, there's not really room for him with the Chargers, which is why he's no longer there. Of course, the Chargers now have a loaded backfield with Amarian Hampton and Najee Harris there too. But J.K. Dobbins could absolutely be useful to somebody, to anybody that needs some sort of running back help. Another guy that I'm a little surprised is still on the market is Justin Simmons, the safety/corner from the Falcons last year, but he spent most of his career with Denver, and he may not be a Pro Bowler anymore, but he has been a Pro Bowler, and he's a veteran guy. He's 31 years old, so he's a little on the older side when it comes to secondary players, but adding a veteran, knowledgeable kind of secondary player like Justin Simmons who can still produce, maybe not necessarily at the level that he once was able to, but he still can produce, and he could still be a solid piece, a veteran leader in a locker room that's maybe got a young secondary or, whatever the case there. But he could be useful for somebody for sure. The other receiver that I was briefly mentioning before that is still on the market as well is Keenan Allen, former Bears and, of course, former Chargers wide receiver. He is 33 years old going into this coming season. He didn't really mesh with the Bears offense last season, but then again, not a lot of people did because the Bears were coached pretty poorly last year and kind of have been over the course of the last few years or so. But they're hoping that changes, of course, with Ben Johnson in there now. But Keenan Allen is no longer on the Bears, so he's a free agent. So a number of teams could possibly use him. He's a veteran guy, could come in. He's not going to be wide receiver 1 or anything like that. Not anymore, but I keep looking to the Cowboys as a team that is, wide receiver needy. Obviously, they have CeeDee Lamb, so it's not like they're searching for a wide receiver 1, but they want a guy that can complement him a little bit and maybe take some pressure off of CeeDee Lamb. And Keenan Allen, he may not be, that guy that he once was, but he can still be very productive as long as he can stay healthy, because he's had injury issues in the past as well. So if he can stay healthy, that would be a solid pickup for anybody, because, take a look at older guys that have coming off of injuries. Stephon Diggs, he found a home in New England despite the fact that he's an aging wide receiver and he's coming off of an ACL tear. So Keenan Allen still has a spot out there somewhere, and I'm sure somebody will pick him up in this coming off season as we get closer to training camp and preseason and all of that stuff. So wouldn't surprise me if he ends up somewhere. Another guy on this list here is Julian Blackmon, the former Colts safety. Now, he's still on the relatively younger side. He's 27 years old, started 16 games for the Colts last season, despite the fact that he tore his rotator cuff in week 1. So that kind of shows his toughness and his ability to kind of play through an injury. And he had a pretty solid career for the Colts as a starting safety. So I think he could absolutely still be useful to somebody, and it's kind of surprising that he's still on the market as well. But so many teams' focuses have been towards the NFL draft, and rightfully so. But now that it's over, we might start seeing a lot more signings here in the coming days. There already has been a few signings in recent days. Robert Woods signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. That was one signing that happened in particular. But George Kittle, of course, re-signing with the 49ers, getting an extension there. But moving on here to the last couple guys here on the list. Nick Chubb, of course, the running back from Cleveland, who has really had some hard luck when it comes to injuries in the past couple of years. He had a really, really devastating injury against the Steelers in 2023 on a Monday night game, and, of course, was out the rest of that season and, missed a good chunk of this past season as well, recovering from that knee injury. And he's also had a knee injury in the past, a season-ending ACL tear in the past previously. So with his return last year, about midway through the season, you could kind of tell that he was not really the same guy. Maybe a full year, off of that injury, maybe he'll start producing a little bit more, but he's 29 years old. That's typically kind of in the older years when it comes to running backs, because running backs have typically had a pretty short shelf life. Derrick Henry notwithstanding. But, Nick Chubb, it's just kind of sad what's happened to him, because I've always thought, and even though I'm a Steelers fan and I really don't like the Browns, obviously, but I've always really liked Nick Chubb because I think he's a very, very good running back, physical guy, explosive. He's difficult to stop for sure. And, losing him multiple seasons, was definitely a tough pill to swallow for the Cleveland Browns. So if he can come back at least sort of to where he used to be before that knee injury, like, he could be useful somewhere, absolutely. And then finally, just because we have to mention this guy, is Aaron Rodgers is still technically a free agent, 41 years old, of course, heavily linked to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we'll go ahead and talk about that in the second segment as well. But, so Aaron Rodgers, he's still technically out there as, a free agent, but there has been rumors that maybe he could be leaning towards retirement, but who knows? Steelers have really been the only team that has been linked to him, so it's either Aaron Rodgers signs with the Steelers or he ends up retiring. That's kind of where it is right now for that. So before we get into the rest of the show, we're just going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Aaron Rodgers and what it could mean for the Pittsburgh Steelers if he decides to retire, whether or not they will decide to go with Mason Rudolph or maybe bring in another veteran or just another veteran backup to kind of complete the room. But we'll get into all that when we come back. Just stick with us. We'll be right back right after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Before we get into the next segment here, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder that if you have any questions or comments or anything like that you want to add to the show, you can definitely do that over on the Super Chat. Hit the Super Chat button and go ahead and write down your question or your comment that you might have. Or you can, of course, go to the GSMC Sports.net website to tip, donate, or leave a question or a comment over there. So let's go ahead and get into the second segment here on the show. And it's everybody's favorite topic to talk about, and that is, of course, the Aaron Rodgers ongoing saga. And it really has become a saga. It's as what I kind of expected it would be when all of this, all these rumors and stories and all that started developing about Aaron Rodgers coming to Pittsburgh. Kind of knew that it was going to be a circus all the way until he finally decides to make a decision, which I'm thinking is probably not going to come until pretty close to training camp. Maybe mandatory mini camp. Maybe you get a decision right around there. If not, I think the Steelers should move on. But let's talk about what happens if the Steelers have no choice but to move on. So if Aaron Rodgers retires, and if he retires, there's several options that the Steelers could possibly go with. Number one, would not surprise me if they tried to make an attempt to make a trade for Kirk Cousins to bring in and then maybe add another veteran backup guy or something like that to fill out the quarterback room. But I think possibly Kirk Cousins could be an option. They would have to work out the money, of course, with Atlanta probably not wanting to eat as much cap as they're probably going to have to in order to get rid of him. Of course, he's a $100+ million quarterback that's essentially a backup now, so they have wanted to get rid of him, but they haven't been able to find anybody to trade with him just because of that cap hit, the potential cap hit, and how much they would have to pay to get him. Now, the last time we saw Kirk Cousins, he wasn't necessarily super productive in Atlanta. He had a pretty rough year coming back from that Achilles injury, but maybe there's possible hope that after a full year removed from that injury, maybe he can get back to some semblance of what he was when he was in Minnesota. But I typically kind of tend to believe that that was more of a symptom, as far as his success in Minnesota, it was more of a symptom of the team that they had built around Kirk Cousins. Not to say that Kirk Cousins is a bad quarterback, because I don't think he is a bad quarterback. I think he's perfectly average. I think he has a very good agent, is what I would say, because he has, he's gotten some pretty crazy contracts that I've myself questioned as to whether or not he really deserves that kind of money, because he really hasn't done a whole lot, if you really think about it. He's never been to an NFC Championship game. Usually in the playoffs, he doesn't really play particularly well. He's had that long history of struggling in primetime games as well, although that was kind of squashed a little bit in his time in Minnesota. But, you could probably put a lot of that towards Justin Jefferson and then even, Stephon Diggs when he was there too. But, so there's questions around Kirk Cousins and whether or not he is even, 100% still, because he's another quarterback that's kind of an aging quarterback. And the only difference is that Kirk Cousins is probably going to be more expensive if you want to trade for him as opposed to getting Aaron Rodgers, more than likely, because Aaron Rodgers is only going to play on a one-year deal, most likely, and who knows what the money's going to be in regards to that. But Kirk Cousins, it becomes a little bit different because he's probably going to want a multiple-year contract in some vein, and, who knows how much that would equal to. Like I said, he has a very good agent, so it wouldn't surprise me if he wants a pretty significant amount of money to, play for Pittsburgh or play for anybody, really. So that's kind of their option. That's one of the options if Aaron Rodgers decides to retire. Now, the other option that they have is they can ride it out with Mason Rudolph, and they could maybe bring in a veteran guy to be the backup or compete with Will Howard for that quarterback 2 spot. Most likely, whatever veteran they would bring in would be the number 2 guy, and Will Howard would, sit at the quarterback 3 spot more than likely. Everybody likes to bring up, well, maybe not everybody on the national media outlets, but a lot of the Steelers fans that I listen to, or, reporters that I listen to, all kind of mention Skylar Thompson as being part of the quarterback room, and he's on a futures contract, so that's nothing really. He's a camp body, essentially. He's not going to be on the roster more than likely come week 1. So they're probably going to add another quarterback. And plus, the Steelers always go into the training camp with 4 quarterbacks on their roster. And currently they have 2, and they have 1 on a futures contract. So they're most likely going to add, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, or, whatever the case, they're going to add at least another quarterback, possibly 2, if the Aaron Rodgers thing falls through. So we will see in terms of that. But I think if they ride with Mason Rudolph, they can at least have a quarterback that can keep their heads above water for the season. I don't think, obviously, Mason Rudolph is leading any team to a Super Bowl or anything like that. But a lot of people, when they think about Mason Rudolph, they unfortunately only remember the, helmet game, where him and Myles Garrett got into it. Myles Garrett swung a helmet, and then all of that, nonsense happened and everything. But a lot of people always just think about that, and that he, hasn't really done anything for the Steelers. And really, if you think about it, he hasn't really been given the chance to. I mean, most of the time that he's had been in Pittsburgh before he, went to Tennessee for a year, he was playing under Ben Roethlisberger, and he was never going to be the starter as long as Ben Roethlisberger was there. And he did get in a few games, and he actually has a pretty solid record as a starter in Pittsburgh. If you take a look at it, he has a 9-8-1 overall record if you take into account his time in Tennessee. But if you take that away, he's 8-4-1 as a Steelers starter. So that's 4 games above 500. I mean, say what you want, that's still a winning record, and he's not some scrub. I think that he can absolutely keep this team afloat, and he's got pretty good weapons around him too. If you look at it, I mean, DK Metcalf is one of the best receivers in the league. George Pickens still, I think, has yet to really hit his full potential, but he has the ability, he has all the physical tools that you want in a receiver. Calvin Austin is a solid number 3 guy that doesn't get talked about enough because he's a number 3 slot receiver. And they've got a much better running game this year, I think. At least I think they're going to have a much better running game this year with the addition of Caleb Johnson to that running back room that already has Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell as well. So, that's a better running back room. And arguably this offense is a better offense than the one that Mason Rudolph led to a 3-1 record down the stretch a couple of years ago that got them into the playoffs, 3 straight regular season wins, and then, of course, the loss at Buffalo in the wild card round. But, a lot of the reason why he was able to do that was, not only receivers making big plays and all that, but, he stayed in the pocket a lot. He's not a mobile quarterback, which can hurt you sometimes if you have really bad offensive line, but and back then the Steelers did, but I do think the offensive line is going to be a bit better this year. They're going to have Troy Fautanu back from his injury last year. He should solidify the right side of that line. And then Broderick Jones moving over to his natural position at left tackle. And then, of course, you got Zach Frazier, who's a very solid center going into his second season. Really impressed as a rookie on that line. He was one of the better offensive linemen that the Steelers had. Then, of course, you've still got Isaac Seumalo, the veteran there. So it's a pretty solid offensive line on paper, whether or not they actually go out and prove it, because, of course, Broderick Jones has had his struggles, certainly. If they can keep all that together, that's a better offense than what Mason Rudolph was running before, because that was still technically the Matt Canada offense, even though Matt Canada had been fired by then. It still was his plays and his offense, and now this is going to be a offensive coordinator, of course, who's got a year under the system in his belt now, but he is a better offensive coordinator than Matt Canada. You can say what you want about Arthur Smith, and, I have my own complaints about him, but he is a better offensive coordinator than Matt Canada, and it's not a stretch to really say that, but that's kind of where the Steelers offense stands right now. And I think that's a better situation than what Mason Rudolph was, leading last time he led the Steelers, which was a 3-game winning streak to end the regular season, which got them into the playoffs before they ultimately lost in the first round. But so that was a lesser team, and he was able to do that. So I think, he could have some success. And, who knows, maybe it ends in Mike Tomlin's first ever non-losing season, whatever the case. If that does happen, it's a win-win for the Steelers, in my opinion, because that puts them into position to possibly go after their franchise quarterback next year in next year's draft. So I think you don't really risk too much by putting Mason out there. So that's another option. Now, the final option I wanted to talk about is giving Will Howard a chance to actually start. That means keeping an open competition in camp. You bring in another guy just to fill out the quarterback room, and you let Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, and whoever it is that you bring in compete for that job. And you would hope that Will Howard would be the guy that won that job, but of course, you don't really know until you actually see them play. But give him a chance to start, and who knows, if it works out, you may not even need to draft a quarterback next year if it all works out, because you just never know with certain guys. Tom Brady was a 5th-round pick. So nobody really thinks that 5th-rounders or such, can, end up being your franchise quarterbacks and all that. But, look at another case, Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. He leads the 49ers to a Super Bowl appearance, so it's possible that you can find a diamond in the rough in the later rounds, where guys or teams may not look super fondly on them, but then he ends up being pretty good. So that is definitely a possibility. And there's also the possibility that he could crash and burn and it could be a really bad season. That's also a possibility as well, but that is a possibility if you sign Aaron Rodgers as well. So those are kind of the options that the Steelers kind of have in front of themselves right now. If Aaron Rodgers was to retire, of course. So in my opinion, just as a fan, I would rather see one of the two options that I mentioned here, and that's either ride with Mason Rudolph, sign a veteran backup, and let Will Howard compete for the second spot, or let Will Howard compete for the starting job, have an open competition in camp. I think either of those two are better options for the Steelers than either a Kirk Cousins trade or signing Aaron Rodgers. I just think for the long term, see what you got in Will Howard. Why not? And if he's not the guy, then you go get your guy next year. That's the way I see it. But so that is it for that segment. So we're all done talking about Aaron Rodgers for this show, thankfully. When we come back, though, we're going to dive into some divisional talk here. We're going to talk about the AFC West and their post-draft outlook, kind of go over some of the picks that they had, as well as some other additions that they've made throughout the course of the season, each team in the AFC West, and kind of just give my overall outlook on who I think is going to end up winning the division, who's going to be the most competitive, yada, yada, yada. So stick with us. We'll be right back right after this, and then we're going to talk some AFC West football. All right, so stick with us. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, welcome back to the show here, and we're going to get right into our next segment. We're going to talk some AFC West football here. Obviously, the draft is now in the rearview mirror, and we are starting to get actually prepared for the upcoming NFL season. Now that the draft is in the books, we're going to have rookie minicamp here soon, and then, of course, mandatory minicamp. OTAs have, of course, partially off-season workouts, things like that have partially been open to some teams. And then, of course, we get training camp and then, all of the preseason action leading into the regular season. So we got a lot of things coming up. It's not, a super busy part of the year, but it's also not a really quiet part of the year either. Now that teams are starting to try and get their rosters completely filled out for training camp purposes and all of that. So let's get into it. First of all, the first team that we're going to cover here is the team that won the division and lost in the Super Bowl this past season. That is the Kansas City Chiefs. Last year, of course, winning 15 games and then being able to be the number one seed, getting to the Super Bowl, and then ultimately losing in that matchup. But that was their third straight Super Bowl appearance. And Patrick Mahomes' seventh straight AFC Championship appearance for the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes as the starter. So still a lot of accolades there. And if you take a look at some of the things that they have done this offseason, of course, the draft came and went. They got a really good tackle at the end of the first round in Josh Simmons, so that'll help replace the loss of Joe Thuney on that offensive line. He has the potential, if he can keep healthy, because he's had some injuries in the past, but if he can stay healthy, he could end up being a very, very good tackle for them. They got a couple of other guys along the defensive line, Omar Norman Lott and edge rusher Ashton Gillott. Both of those guys are going to come in and hopefully help along that defensive line with Chris Jones and company. And they had a very good defense last year. So, they're hoping to continue that. They've got a very good defensive coordinator, of course, and Steve Spagnuolo. So, all signs pointing to the Chiefs having a stout defense once again. And it's just really the offensive line that has a little bit of question marks because of the, way in which they were beat in the Super Bowl by a lot of, pass rush, by just 4 guys. Like the Eagles only rushed 4 guys a good chunk of that Super Bowl and were still able to harass Patrick Mahomes throughout that entire game. So they're looking to become a little bit more stout on the offensive line for sure to try and protect Patrick Mahomes. So nothing like that happens again in a situation like that. So take a look at some of the guys that they have signed as far as free agents. Defensive tackle Jerry Tillery. Backup quarterback Gardner Minshew, of course, coming over from the Ravens, or excuse me, not Ravens, the Raiders. Christian Fulton, the corner, trying to add some depth to their secondary there. They added running back Elijah Mitchell and offensive tackle Jalen Moore as well. And a couple of other things, they also re-signed Kareem Hunt and, of course, wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. So both of those guys coming back. So they've kind of solidified some, continuity there in some of those positions. So the Chiefs, as far as what their outlook could be, I think they're going to be challenged a lot more this year than they have been in possibly recent past, just because that division has been upgraded significantly throughout this offseason. And, of course, the Broncos are right there, I think, as a team that could challenge them. Chargers as well. Raiders to a lesser extent, but they still have gotten better too. So it's going to be tough for the Chiefs to possibly take this division again. Of course, I do think that they have the horses to do it because they are the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, and it's hard to really count out a team led by Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. But when you actually look at it, this entire division has gotten significantly better, and I don't think the Chiefs are heading for another 15-win season this year. I'll at least say that, but I'm not ready to say that they're absolutely not going to win the division, though, because they've shown it, and until somebody knocks them off their perch, I'm just going to keep assuming that they're going to win the division until somebody beats them. I do think it's going to be a much more competitive division this year than it has been in this, Patrick Mahomes era of the Kansas City Chiefs. Last year was even a little bit competitive as well, as 3 teams from that division made the playoffs. But I think it could be another situation like that again this year, with all of those, or all of the teams, in this division have gotten, at least moderately better, even with the Raiders. So that's my outlook for the Chiefs. But for the Broncos, take a look at some of the things they did. I think they had a pretty solid draft overall. Of course, getting a steal with Jahdae Barron kind of falling to them at number 20 in the first round. Now, they did have a need for running back, which they addressed in the second round, picking up R.J. Harvey out of UCF. But a lot of people, myself included, thought that the Broncos were going to go running back here. Amarian Hampton was still on the board at this point. So I thought for sure that he was going to be taken, with the Broncos, but it's hard to pass on a guy like Jahdae Barron when he just falls into your lap like that, and especially when you have a really deadly defense already, but just adding him to a defense with Pat Surtain in that secondary is going to make a very, very difficult time for teams to throw against them. So that'll be fun to watch for sure. A couple of their free agency additions. Evan Engram was a need that they had for sure at tight end, and he comes over from Jacksonville on a 2-year deal. That was a good move from Denver there. He's one of the better pass-catching tight ends, probably one of the more underrated pass-catching tight ends, and that could possibly because where he actually played prior to his Denver time, and that was, of course, in Jacksonville for a few years. Of course, he started his career with the Giants, but moved on to Jacksonville and still produced, even though the Jaguars have kind of been a dumpster fire for a number of years now. He was still productive in Jacksonville, and I think that's a solid pickup for the Broncos to help Bo Nix with a little bit of a security blanket there at tight end. They also added Trent Sherfield on the 2-year deal, and most importantly, the 2 defensive signings that they made this offseason really were the big ones, which was Dre Greenlaw, linebacker from the 49ers, signed him to a 3-year deal, and then Talanoa Hufanga, the safety from the 49ers, also signed him to a 3-year deal. Now, Hufanga and Greenlaw both have had injury issues recently. Dre Greenlaw, the most, recent one that we can really remember is that one in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago when he was running onto the field and, pulled up and was unable to go the rest of the way in that Super Bowl, really changing kind of the landscape of that Super Bowl, really, at that point. But either way, Broncos have added some pretty good guys in free agency. I've really liked what they have done. That team, I think, is right on the verge of competing with the Chiefs for the AFC West title. They're going to be more competitive once they get into the playoffs because I do think they will be a playoff team this year. And they could potentially go further than they did last year, which was a first-round blowout loss to the Bills. I think they have the talent on that team, and they're being built in such a way that they can absolutely do a little bit of damage in the playoffs. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl or anything like that, but, stranger things have happened. I challenge anybody to tell me that they really truly thought that the Rams and Bengals was going to be a Super Bowl matchup a couple of years ago. In that particular season, there were times where the Bengals looked like they may not even make the playoffs, and then they went on a run in the playoffs and got to the Super Bowl. So, anything can happen really when you get into the playoffs. And the Broncos are being built in a very good way in which the playoffs are kind to those sorts of teams when you have a solid run game, which is still to be determined for the Broncos. But if you have a very, very good defense and at least a capable quarterback and some weapons on the outside, which I do think the Broncos have, then you can do some things in this league. And it's going to be interesting to see if they are able to kind of break over the hump and possibly even win that division. That would be pretty crazy. But I think they have the talent to be able to do it. It's just going to kind of matter. Those matchups, those in-division matchups are going to really be the most important part of this whole ride, because I think this is going to be a very close division. So every game is going to be important. I mean, every game is always important anyway in the NFL because you only get 17 of them. But still, this is going to be a very close division. So every game is going to be important. I mean, every game is always important anyway in the NFL because you only get 17 of them. But still, it's going to be very important. It's going to be critical. Moving on, the Raiders, they made some pretty good moves overall this year. I really like what they have done. Draft-wise, they go and they get Ashton Jeanty in the first round. A very, very talented running back, best running back in the class, arguably one of the best players overall in this draft. That is a huge pickup for the Raiders because they have desperately needed running back help since they lost Josh Jacobs a couple of years ago. Having Alexander Madison on that team, and that's pretty much it that they had as far as rushing attack. He was their rushing leader, and he only had about 400 yards rushing. So definitely looking for improvement in that area, and that they get Ashton Jeanty, and that of course will improve that area tremendously. But more notably on the free agency side, they of course were able to get Geno Smith. They have of course a new head coach in Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, of course, familiar with Geno Smith from their time in Seattle together. So immediately the Raiders are better at quarterback, I think, and better at the head coaching position. So their staff has improved and their personnel on the field has improved as well. So I think the Raiders will be more competitive. I still have them at the bottom of this division, but that's not necessarily a horrible thing because this will be a competitive division, I think. And the Raiders just, I don't think they're quite there yet. I don't think Geno Smith is the guy to get them there in terms of, winning a AFC West title. I think they will focus more on getting a franchise quarterback possibly next year. But I don't think Geno Smith is their future guy. He's going to be there for a couple of years, I believe, but he's been in the league a while, so I can't imagine he is their future. I'm pretty sure they'll be planning for that future in this upcoming offseason. But yeah, so the Raiders will compete for sure, but they're still not quite there yet. And then the final team in this division is the LA Chargers. They had a pretty solid draft as well. Amarian Hampton in the first round, which was kind of a surprise to me because I didn't think that they were going to go running back because they just signed Najee Harris. So now they have a backfield with Najee Harris and Amarian Hampton, two pretty similar styles of running, as far as those guys. I do think Amarian Hampton is more explosive than Najee Harris. Najee Harris can be a thumper for sure, but he's never really had the speed, that breakaway speed that you see in a lot of running backs. But he's very durable. He doesn't fumble a lot. He's only had a handful of fumbles in his career in Pittsburgh. So he's very careful with the football in that regard, and he runs hard. And when you can kind of tell what kind of game Najee Harris is going to have by the first couple of runs that he has in the game. If he gets up and trash talks and starts, doing all that, then you're kind of in the, you're in the mood for a pretty solid performance from Najee Harris. At least that's what he did in Pittsburgh anyway. Whenever he would run really well, you could kind of tell just by his attitude at the beginning of the game and during the beginning parts of the game as to whether or not he was going to be a very, very good, running back in that day. But they did pick up a couple of other guys in the draft. Kyle Kennard, the SEC Player of the Year last year. So that is obviously great value in the 4th round that they were able to get him out of South Carolina. So he'll come in and he'll compete for some playing time as well. And, SEC Player of the Year, you don't keep a guy like that on the bench for too long. So that'll add to their defense for sure. Other additions that they've had along this offseason, one of the bigger additions that they had was along the offensive line, getting Mekhi Becton over there. So that will solidify the offensive guard spot. They did pick up Dante Jackson, who was also a former Steeler. He was only with Pittsburgh for a year last year, though, but they get him on a 2-year deal. He had some pretty productive games for the Steelers last year. Had about 5 interceptions, so he can make some splash plays, but he had injuries or issues with his back towards the end of last year that kind of slowed down his production a little bit. So if he can stay healthy, he could be a solid depth guy for that secondary for sure. They also brought back Mike Williams. Of course, he started his career in LA LA, and then he went to the Jets for a year or so before ultimately landing in Pittsburgh for about half a season, and then, of course, he goes back to LA this offseason. So he's a guy that can still make good catches. I saw him do it several times for Pittsburgh. They just didn't use him nearly as much as they should have, especially with the injuries that they had at the wide receiver position, primarily George Pickens towards the end of last year. Didn't really use Mike Williams like they should have, but every time he did get used, he made a big play, so he's still capable of that. And he didn't really have any injuries last year. They just didn't use him for whatever reason. So I don't blame him for going back to LA and not wanting to re-sign with Pittsburgh, because I wouldn't want to re-sign with Pittsburgh either if I was in his position, not getting really any kind of, playing time at all. It's just, you're not going to be able to do anything as a wide receiver if you can't get on the field. But some other moves that they made, they got a defensive interior lineman, Deshaun Hand, 1 year, $3.5 million contract. They also signed tight end Tyler Conklin, and they did lose a tight end in this offseason, Parham, one guy that ended up going over to Pittsburgh. So they kind of re-upped their tight end position. I mean, they did draft a tight end out of Syracuse, Oronde Gadsden, with the 5th round pick, their second 5th round pick that they had. But, of course, they signed Tyler Conklin, who can come in and contribute right away. So they've made some pretty solid moves overall, the Chargers. And I think they, as well as the Broncos, are the more likely teams to actually compete with the Chiefs for the division title, more so than, the Raiders or so. But the Raiders did get better. But I think the Chargers can be right there. They're coached very well. Jim Harbaugh, in his 2nd season this year as the Chargers coach, should be a pretty solid unit overall. So, but we're going to take another break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the AFC East and some of the moves that were made in the offseason and kind of look forward to what they could do this coming season. So stick with us, and we'll be right back right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, guys, welcome back to the show. We're going to get right into the next part of our show here. We're going to talk about the AFC East post-draft outlook there. Number of teams in that division getting better as well. We're going to start, of course, with the team that won the division, as usual. The Buffalo Bills, of course, winning the division last year and eventually losing in the AFC Championship game to who else but the Kansas City Chiefs. That seems to be the only team they ever lose to in the playoffs. So happened again last year. But moving on to this coming season, in the NFL draft, they got their secondary a little bit speedier anyway. Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky, the fastest player in the entire combine this past spring. And, I think that's a solid pickup. I kind of was thinking that maybe they would go Will Johnson here, who ended up falling into the second round, which was a crazy good pickup by the Cardinals if he can stay healthy. But as far as Maxwell Hairston is concerned, that will be a solid pickup for that secondary that definitely needs secondary support so they don't trot out guys like Kaiir Elam, who is, a line at back end as well. So Maxwell Hairston, still some things that he needs to fine-tune with his game, but overall I think he could be a solid pickup for there. I did like the TJ Sanders pickup that they got in the second round. He, of course, should be able to come in and make an impact almost immediately with as talented as he is along that defensive line for Buffalo, that also added Joey Bosa at the edge spot this offseason as well. And, of course, they, re-signing Von Miller, or deciding not to re-sign Von Miller, then they definitely needed to shore up that position as well. So the defensive line should be a bit better this coming season. Of course, it's really, for the Bills, it all just kind of comes down to the playoffs, and if they can get past, the big bad Chiefs that they always seem to have a hard time getting past, then maybe, we can finally start talking about them as being possible Super Bowl champions, But until they do that, everyone's just going to assume that they're going to lose in some heartbreaking fashion in the playoffs, because that's just kind of the Bills' thing. But they did add some guys in free agency as well. Of course, we mentioned Joey Bosa, the edge rusher, getting him for just a one-year deal, $12.6 million. So this is kind of like a prove-it sort of deal for Joey Bosa. It didn't really work out in L.A., so they're hoping that he can turn into something promising here in Buffalo. They also added to their wide receiver depth, getting Joshua Palmer on a 3-year, $36 million deal. Also signing defensive interior lineman Larry Ogunjobi. Spent the past couple of years with Pittsburgh, was kind of in and out of the lineup due to injury, which has kind of been the story of Ogunjobi the past few years. Since he's been in the league, he's kind of done this same sort of thing everywhere he's went, whether it be Cincinnati, Cleveland, or Pittsburgh. He's had, injury issues, but when he is healthy and he is on the field, he is an effective defensive interior lineman for sure. I did like Larry Ogunjobi, and it does kind of suck seeing him go somewhere else, but, I do understand. It's a business at the end of the day, and Larry Ogunjobi just wasn't getting on the field enough to warrant what they would have to pay to keep him there. And they, got better along the defensive line anyway through the draft, did Pittsburgh. But of course, so did the Bills, of course, getting Larry Ogunjobi and Joey Bosa as well as TJ Sanders along that defensive line. So their defensive line should be improved for sure. They added a couple of depth guys in other positions through free agency. Kendrick Green at the guard position. Punter Brad Robbins, most likely, you don't know if that guy's going to be on the team come training camp, because kickers and punters, a lot of the times they're just kind of brought in for workouts just to kind of see, what could happen, maybe push a kicker to, up his game a bit. So who knows, what significance that signing is going to be. But Derek Forrest, the one-year deal as well, and wide receiver Laviska Shenault Jr., all those guys signed for the Buffalo Bills this offseason. Bills, of course, still the favorites to win this division. I still like them as the team to win the division this particular season. I do think a couple of teams in this division did get better in the Patriots, and surprisingly, even the Jets, I think, got better this offseason. The Dolphins, I'm kind of meh on, to be honest, but we'll talk about them in a little bit. But so yeah, I like the Bills as the favorites to win the division so far to this point, barring any kind of injury or anything like that. So moving on to the Patriots, taking a look at some of the guys that they had in the draft. I'm not going to get too detailed into what they did in the draft, because we did mention them in a couple of shows beforehand, but of course they take Will Campbell, the tackle out of LSU, with the 4th pick, and then they get their running back in the 2nd round, Travion Henderson, out of Ohio State. Now, there was talk that maybe the Patriots would go after Ashton Genty in the draft, but that didn't end up happening. They stayed put at number 4 and then got their guy, Will Campbell, at the tackle spot. Now, some concerns about his arm length arose during the whole pre-draft process, but I don't think that's really going to be much of an issue. I think Will Campbell will be just fine in New England, and he's going to be coached very well. Mike Vrabel is a good coach as well. Josh McDaniels, good offensive coordinator. Say what you want about him as a head coach, but he has always been successful as an offensive coordinator for sure. So they bring him in as well to help with that offense, and Drake May and all that. Add a couple wide receivers. In the draft, you had Kyle Williams from Washington State. That'll add to the depth, but the big wide receiver that they got was, of course, Stephon Diggs in free agency. They signed him to a 3-year, $69 million contract coming off of a ACL tear in Houston last year. So question marks around Stephon Diggs still for sure, but he's still a quality receiver if he can stay healthy. Big signing they had was Milton Williams, the defensive tackle from Philly, and that's a 4-year, $104 million contract. That was a big signing, making this defense very, very stout up front. Carlton Davis, the corner, coming over from Detroit. That's another solid pickup. They add Harold Landry from Tennessee, and, that's also a solid pickup. He's the edge rusher there. Robert Spillane, I think, is a pretty solid linebacker as well. He can make some decent plays, and he plays special teams as well, but he can also get in there on defense, and he's made some pretty good plays in his time in, of course, Pittsburgh and a few years ago, Tennessee, and then, of course, the Raiders, which is where he was the last couple of years. So definitely a solid pickup there. One of the more underrated pickups, I think. Mac Hollins coming over from Buffalo, actually, signing with the New England Patriots as well. So that adds to their wide receiver room also. So you got Mac Hollins, you got Stephon Diggs, of course, and then you got Kyle Williams fits in there somewhere. They still got Keyshawn Butte. So we'll have to see how that wide receiver room shakes up, but it should be a much better room than it was last year for Drake May. So Patriots, I think, are pretty close to competing with the Bills for the AFC East title, but I don't think they're quite there just yet. Maybe another year and they'll be right there in terms of competing with them overall. So I do like what the Patriots have done this offseason, and I could see them as a fringe playoff team for sure this year. So just moving on now to the rest of this division. The Miami Dolphins are the one team that I didn't think were, terribly, they didn't have a terrible draft or anything like that, but I don't think they, really, blew anybody's socks off by their draft. I mean, I do like a couple of their picks. Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, I think that's a very good pick along that defensive line. They're not going to have Calais Campbell there because he, of course, goes back to Arizona, but he was getting up there in age anyway, so not really surprising that he's not there too. But another guy that they got in the draft that's just kind of interesting was Quinn Ewers, the Texas quarterback. I was kind of curious myself as to where he would end up. Miami is not where I had him pegged to land, but they get him in the 7th round, which I think is pretty solid value for him, going in the 7th round. I don't know how much playing time he would get because, of course, the injury situations with Tua that seem to always arise. Who knows? Maybe he could end up getting some playing time, but he's a 7th round pick, so it's going to take some work for him to move up the depth chart for sure. But Dolphins overall, I'm not really super crazy about them. Just take a look at what their free agency signings are. James Daniels is a solid guard. He missed all of last year because of his injury in Pittsburgh, but when he has been on the field, at least in Pittsburgh and then before that in Chicago, he's always been a very solid guard. So I think that's a solid pickup for them. $24 million over 3 years, that's a steal, in my opinion, when it comes to him. They also got Zach Wilson to fill out that quarterback room. So now you got Tua, Zach Wilson, and then, of course, Quinn Ewers as your 3 quarterbacks on Miami. So interesting quarterback room for sure. And with the injury issues or injury past of Tua, it's possible that one or two of those other guys can get some playing time this year. We'll have to see. But they also added Nick Westbrook-Ikhine from coming over from Tennessee, and there's a lot of questions surrounding Tyreek Hill, whether or not he's going to even be back next year. We'll have to see, but that's still kind of up in the air. But this keeps at least some semblance of their wide receiver unit intact because, of course, they still have a solid wide receiver group. Jalen Waddle still there, and, of course, Tyreek Hill still technically on the roster, but, we don't know what's going on with them. Jalen Ramsey, of course, requesting a trade, so that's part of their defense that they need to kind of shore up. And Javon Holland, of course, left, so that's another piece that they had to kind of address. So a lot of questions around around the Dolphins. So I'm still going to put them probably about third in the division, maybe third or fourth, probably fourth actually, because I actually like the Jets better than the Dolphins this year. And speaking of which, let's just go ahead and talk about the Jets. They shored up their offensive line in the draft by getting Armand Membao from Missouri, the offensive tackle. They also do add a tight end, which is who I thought they were going to end up getting in the first round. Not the same guy, but same position. I thought they were going to go Tyler Warren, but of course they didn't do that. But they do this in the second round. They get two guys, and Mason Taylor is a solid guy that they can add to that tight end room for sure. But I did like what the Jets did overall. What they've done in this offseason has been pretty decent too. I like them in terms of the Jets. I like the Justin Fields signing. I think that's a smart move there. They've got a whole new coaching staff in Aaron Glenn coming over from Detroit. He's a defensive-minded guy. He's the defensive coordinator there. But Justin Fields, I think, will be given a lot more freedom to kind of do what makes him really good, do the things that makes him good. And I think he'll get a lot more opportunity in New York than he ever did in Pittsburgh. I don't think he really got a fair shot in Pittsburgh. He started the first 6 games and was 4-2 and was actually improving before Mike Tomlin decided to bench him and go for Russell Wilson. So I think Justin Fields still has, promise in his future. I think he can still develop into a pretty good quarterback. And maybe he'll do just that in New York. And I know it's kind of a tough place to play with the Jets. They kind of usually are, a little bit of a dumpster fire, but, new coaching staff and all that. So maybe it'll be a new mindset. And Justin Fields, I'm rooting for him for sure. I really want to see him do well because I wanted him to remain in Pittsburgh, but that didn't happen, of course. So a couple of other guys they added free agency-wise. Brandon Stevens, corner, signed him to a 3-year, $36 million contract. They shored up the safety position a little bit with Andre Sisco at safety, and that's just a 1-year deal. They signed Josh Reynolds, the wide receiver coming over from Detroit, 1 year up to $5 million. And then they added some other guys on depth pieces as well. So overall, I think the Jets can be competitive. I don't think they're going to be a division title winner or anything like that. But like I said, I kind of have them just above Miami. I have them at the number 3 spot in the division. So I think it goes Bills, Patriots, Jets, Dolphins in terms of how that division shakes out. But that's just my opinion. So when we come back, though, because that's going to do it for the AFC East talk, when we come back, we're going to talk some Colorado football. We're going to talk about their season outlook now that they have, of course, lost 2 very key players in Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, but they also lost a few other guys as well to the NFL. So we're going to talk about what their outlook might look like this year. So stick with us. We got one more break, one more segment coming up, so stick with us. We'll be right back right after this. right, guys, welcome back to the final segment of the show before we send you guys on for the rest of your night. We're going to talk a little bit of college football in our ongoing College Corner segment of the show, usually reserved for the last part of the show. So we're going to talk about the Colorado Buffaloes, and obviously a lot of talk has been surrounding Colorado-linked players, of course, because of the Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders news. Of course, Travis Hunter going number 2 overall to the Jaguars, Heisman Trophy winner, all-world, generational kind of talent. One of those rare guys that comes along every now and then. He can play 2 positions. He can play both positions very, very well as well. So Colorado's going to have a hard time replacing that on both sides of the ball. And, of course, they come into this coming season with a brand-new quarterback. And it's still up in the air as far as who is going to be the starter. There's a couple of guys, though, that are battling it out through a spring camp and all that to take that job. But 9-4 overall record last year, 7-2 in the Big 12. So overall, pretty solid year for Colorado. Compared to the first year that Deion Sanders was in command, where they went about 4-8 and did not get to a bowl game, and it was a pretty rough year when they had a lot of hype coming into that year. They had less hype coming into this past year and did better. So there's going to be even less hype this year because they have the departure of 2 key players. So questions abound for Deion Sanders and this coaching staff. So 2 primary contenders, for the quarterback job. Kaydon Salter, a transfer over from Liberty, and Julian Lewis, who is a highly touted freshman. Both of those guys will have an opportunity to compete for the starting job. Take a look at both of these guys individually. Kaydon Salter, the transfer, 4-year veteran at Liberty. He's a dual-threat quarterback, known for some pretty good arm strength, and he can also, of course, run the ball very well. And he's seen by a number of people, at least at this point, as the favorite for the starting job. But Julian Lewis is right on his heels, though. He is a highly touted 4-star prospect, and he has a very strong arm talent, and is expected to be a pretty significant threat in this competition. So it's not just signed, sealed, and delivered type of deal. It's not all done. It's still kind of up in the air because Julian Lewis is still a talented young quarterback. So ultimately, they may go with the veteran guy, 4-year veteran, of course, in Kaydon Salter, but Julian Lewis has at least more upside for the team. That is because he'll probably still be here for a couple of years, depending on if he transfers out or all that nonsense. But that's what the quarterback position is looking like right now. As far as running back, Colorado enters this coming season with a new running back coach, very familiar name, Mr. Marshall Faulk, former NFL running back, Hall of Fame running back for the St. Louis Rams, back when they were the St. Louis Rams. Of course, he got drafted by the Indianapolis Colts, though, before ultimately moving on to the Rams, winning a Super Bowl there, and just having a Hall of Fame career. So he comes in as the new running back coach, and he's got a roster that includes 2 returning players at the running back position in Micah Welch and Dallin Hayden, along with some potential additions from the transfer portal as well. They're looking to improve their rushing attack, which was a big struggle in their offense, despite the fact that their offense was relatively high-powered, didn't have much trouble moving the ball, but when it came to running the ball, they struggled. They were last among all college football teams in rushing yards per game. They averaged just a measly 65.2 yards per game last year, so definitely they want to improve that. Their leading rusher last year was Isaiah Augustave, and he managed just 384 yards on 85 carries. 4.5 yards per attempt, so not a bad number there, but if you take a look at the grand total of what their numbers were, it just has not been good. They've only scored 27 combined rushing touchdowns over the past 2 seasons as well, so that's a position that absolutely needs addressing, and it needs to be upgraded, and it needs to be better this year than it has been. The other guy, Micah Welch, that is, of course, in the running as well for this starting job. He is bringing that power, that physicality to the run game. Welch offers the speed and elusiveness as opposed to Augustave's power and physicality. So that's going to be kind of a good 1-2 punch if they go ahead and go with those 2 guys for your 1-2 starters. for Colorado. So that's what's going on at running back for them. At wide receiver, of course, the biggest hole to fill on the offensive side of the ball is Travis Hunter, wide receiver / corner from last year. He got basically all the accolades that you could ask for. Heisman Trophy winner, the Letnikoff Award winner for the most outstanding receiver in college football from a year ago. So it's not just him, though, that they're losing. They're losing 3 other wide receivers, Jimmy Horn Jr., LeJontay Wester, and Will Shepard. All of those guys, including Travis Hunter, are going to be gone. So it's a completely new wide receiver room for the most part. Draylon Miller, is the one guy that is returning. The departing receivers, just to kind of give you an idea, the departing receivers, 3,251 yards, 32 touchdowns combined between the 4 of them. So that will create a lot of opportunities for other guys with all of those guys moving on. So taking a look at Draylon Miller, he was the 5th leading receiver last season, with all 4 of the guys that were ahead of him are now gone either to the NFL or transferred out. His true freshman season, which was last year, he tallied 277 yards, 32 receptions, and had 3 touchdowns. Could step up into a larger role this year, probably should with the departure of all of those guys. He will probably be sealed in at the slot receiver position, most likely. Other guys that are still possibly competing, guys like Amarian Miller, Quentin Gibson, and Joseph Williams, all those guys will get chances to compete for that number 1 job as well. The most likely guy that's going to be the number 1 is Amarian Miller. He's shown flashes that he could possibly be the next star receiver for Colorado if he can stay on the field. Last year, when injuries started to pile up for Colorado at the wide receiver position, he stepped up in a game against Kansas State and had 145 yards on 8 catches. So he definitely has the potential to be an all-world number 1 receiver kind of guy. And he's probably going to be your starter, your number 1 guy at the start of the season. Most likely, he's going to be the guy that's going to try and take over that spot that Travis Hunter, of course, has left. Another guy, though, Quentin Gibson, freshman from Fort Worth, Texas, and he was also the National High School Football Player of the Year, and he could make his mark this year for Colorado as well. Young guy, new look offense, though, with the new starting quarterback and some new players alongside that offense. So he could get an opportunity to shine. He's a fast receiver, so he can get into like a speedster sort of role. And anybody whoever it is that wins the job should be able to use him as a pretty solid asset with his speed and his elusiveness. He's 5'9", so kind of a smaller receiver, but his senior year in high school, he had over 2,000 yards on less than 100 catches. So he had 93 receptions, 2,009 yards, and 36 touchdowns in his senior year. Of course, high school is way different than college football, but still, that's productive numbers, no matter how you slice it. So he has very, very good potential. So whether or not he is able to live up to that, if he is utilized the proper way, then that remains to be seen. But moving on, Joseph Williams is the other guy that's on the squad. There is potential to make some impact. He is the incoming transfer from Tulsa. He had 30 catches for 588 yards and 5 TDs in just 7 games last season. They could potentially have a gem with this guy. He's a bigger receiver, 6'2" frame. Kind of puts some Buffalo fans, should put some Buffalo fans in the mind of a guy like Will Shepard, who was a pretty consistent red zone presence last year, so he could be used a very similar way. Joseph Williams, so he has the frame to be able to do that, and I'm sure that's how they're going to utilize him, so that'll be interesting to see how that works out too. As far as their defense is concerned, they got to replace Travis Hunter on that side as well because he played corner, but their defense took a huge step forward last year thanks to some pretty stellar play on just about all 3 levels and a great addition to that defense overall in defensive coordinator Robert Livingston. Hired him over from the NFL, and this is his first time being a defensive coordinator, and last year was anyway, and now he's the highest paid assistant in school history for Deion Sanders' staff. He did a very, very good job with that defense last year. They improved on just about every statistical category on defense, most notably in the pass rush department. They led all the Big 12 in sacks. Still, though, he has a lot of dynamic players that were on that defense that are moving on to the NFL. So they're going to have to kind of restock and reshuffle, kind of see what they can come up with this year defensively. Defensive end Arden Walker had a career year last year, setting new highs in tackles and tackles for loss at 33 tackles and 7 tackles for loss. Also had 4.5 sacks. Not only got after the quarterback, but he actually showed his ability with his agility on the edge against the run as well. So definitely a solid player to have there. Another guy along that defensive line, Jaheim Otis, Colorado's highest rated incoming transfer. So that's going to really be a good job, or really good thing for the Buffalo's defense. He's going to be able to kick inside on that defensive line along that 4-man front. He's a big-body defensive lineman. Clog up the middle, clog up those lanes and all that. So definitely a solid transfer for Colorado overall. They also have Samuel Okonlalo, who made an immediate impact during his first season in Boulder, and he played in all 13 games last year, had 10 starts, had 30 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. So I'm sure those numbers will be increased this year with some departures along that defensive line. So look for him to have an immediate impact when the season gets going for sure. As far as some other guys here, just to kind of round out the secondary as well. At the secondary position, you have a guy like Colton Hood. He's going to step into that starting role that Travis Hunter has since vacated since moving on to the NFL. But fans of Colorado already know how impactful Hood can be in the game as long as he stays healthy. He saw some significant playing time in relief of Travis Hunter during the game against Kansas State and Arizona, and he picked off a pass in each game and almost took both of those to the house as well. So he has the potential for big play ability. So the secondary will definitely look different, but it should still be solid with a solid coaching staff. And of course, you got a Hall of Fame defensive back as your head coach in Deion Sanders. So that's got to be helpful to a certain degree as well. So that's kind of Colorado's outlook. They were 9-4 last year. I could see them being maybe about a game or so below that, just with the questions at quarterback. A lot of guys that they have got to replace. It's not easy to replace a guy like Travis Hunter and, even Shedeur Sanders, for a lot of the flack that he gets with this NFL draft coverage and everything. He had some pretty productive numbers for this Colorado offense, and they're going to have to replace that. Whether they like Sanders or not. So a lot of things, a lot of questions for Colorado overall. But that should do it for the show overall. I do appreciate all of you guys for joining me. I apologize for not having a show yesterday. I was feeling a bit under the weather, which I'm still trying to recover from. But so hopefully we'll be all good to go, and I'll be able to bring a show for you guys again tomorrow. Shouldn't have any issues there. I do want to appreciate you guys for joining me, though. Once again, GSMC Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. And we also invite you to follow us on all of the social media accounts, if I can talk right, for more content and updates. So I thank you guys once again. And before I ruin this outro anymore, I'm going to let you guys go and have a good night.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.